My dear Jack, I commence a letter because I am going to make a boat excursion into the interior of Sarawak and may never come back.
Hello, and welcome to the Borneo Chronicles podcast, Episode 2, The Arrival of James Brooke. This podcast is supported by Goethe Institute Malaysia within the framework of Borneo Perantis. When the Singapore Board of Commerce learned that James Brooke, who had just arrived in Singapore at the end of May, was planning a trip to Maludu Bay in Sabah, decided to ask him to stop in at Sarawak first. You see, the board wanted to thank Muda Hassim, the Raja of Sarawak, for his generosity in hosting the shipwreck survivors of the Napoleon, a ship that was transporting antimony to Singapore. James Brooke left Singapore on board his personal yacht, the Royalist, 25th July, 1839. He first enters Sarawak waters after he passes Tanjung Datu. It is the westernmost point of Sarawak.
The bay is about 400 miles in extent and of some depth. At one corner is the river Lundu, and near the extremity of Sepang, the noble mountain of Santubong, close to which is the entrance of the Sarawak River. The entrance of the river is somewhat difficult, but has quarter-less 3 fathom at the first of the ebb. We anchored just inside, in 7.5 fathom, and dispatched a boat to the Raja Muda Hassim. After many inquiries of our boat people, he dispatched a pengiran of rank to welcome us up. The scenery at the entrance of the Sarawak is noble. The peak of Santubong, clothed in richest verdure, rises close to the right bank. Straggling trees mixed with cliffs crown the summit. A white beach, fringed with casuarinas, light and elegant, finishes the whole. We dropped up the river, taking a hasty survey, to the town of Kuchin, or Cat Town. The distance is 35 or 37 miles, water generally deep, but here and there with awkward rocks. On one of these, being ignorant of the river, we were swept by an eddy of tide, but got off without harm. Though, had the ebb been running, our position would have been critical.
The Royalist anchored in the reach close to the town of Sarawak on the 15th of August, and the astonishment of the semi-barbarous inhabitants at seeing a small schooner, the entire crew of which did not amount in number to a third of the crew of one of their war prahus, boldly ascend 20 miles into the interior and quietly take up her berth off the residence of the Raja may easily be conceived. And it would appear that the courage and audacity of such a proceeding, if it did not paralyze any attempt at a hostile movement, may at any rate have excited the admiration of the assembled natives, and have impressed them with awe and reverence for the white strangers.
We anchored abreast of Sarawak at 7 and saluted the Raja with 21 guns, which were returned with 18 from his residence. The Raja's own brother, Pengiran Muhammad, then saluted the vessel with 7 guns, which were returned. Having breakfasted and previously intimated our intention, we pulled ashore to visit the great man. He received us in state, seated in his hall of audience, which outside is nothing but a large shed erected on piles, but within decorated with taste. Chairs were placed on each side of the ruler, who occupied the head seat. Our party were placed on one hand, on the other sat his brother Muhammad and Makota, and some others of his principal chiefs, whilst immediately behind him his 12 younger brothers were seated.
James Brooke was observing diplomatic protocol. By firing 21 shots in succession, Brooke was honoring Raja Muda Hassim's status as being the head of state. When Muda Hassim saluted James Brooke, he fired 18 shots. 18 shots acknowledges Brooke's role as a foreign minister or ambassador. The number of shots fired for the ceremony were prearranged, so it's quite possible Brooke made the suggestion himself. Now, let's get back to the ceremony.
The dress of Muda Hassim was simple, but of rich material, and most of the principal men were well and even superbly dressed. His countenance is plain, but intelligent and highly pleasing, and his manners perfectly elegant and easy. His reception was kind, and, I am given to understand, highly flattering. We sat, however, trammelled with the formality of state, and our conversation did not extend beyond kind inquiries and professions of friendship. We were presented with tobacco rolled up in a leaf, each about a foot long, and tea was served by attendants on their knees. A band of music played wild and not unmusical airs during the interview, and the crowd of attendants who surrounded us were seated around in respectful silence. After a visit of half an hour, we rose and took our leave. Sarawak is but an occasional residence of the Raja Muda Hassim, and he is now detained here by a rebellion in the interior. On my inquiring whether the war proceeded favourably, he replied that there was no war, but merely some child's play among his subjects. From what I hear, however, from other quarters, it is more serious than he represents it, and hints have been thrown out that the Raja wishes me to stay here as a demonstration to intimidate the rebels. We shall see. In the evening, I went ashore suddenly to pay a visit to the Raja, in order, if possible, to break through the bonds of formality. The great man soon made his appearance and received us very well. We talked much of the state of his country and of ours, but he was very guarded when I spoke of the Dutch. He had no dealings whatever, he said, with them, and never allowed their vessels to come here, and therefore could not say what they were like. We sat in easy and unreserved converse, out of hearing of the rest of the circle. He expressed great kindness to the English nation, and begged me to tell him really which was the most powerful nation, England or Holland, or, as he significantly expressed, which is the cat and which the rat. I assured him that England was the mouser, though in this country Holland had most territory. We took our leave after he had intimated his intention of visiting us tomorrow morning. We were ready to receive the Raja after breakfast, but these affairs of state are not so easily managed. There came 2 diplomatists on board to know, in the first place, how many guns we intended to salute with, and, in the second, whether I would go ashore in my gig in order to fetch the chief and his brother off. The latter request I might have refused, but I readily conceded it, because, in the first place, it was less troublesome than a refusal, and in the next, I cared not to bandy paltry etiquettes with a semi-savage, and whatever pride might whisper, I could not, as an individual traveller, refuse an acknowledging of the supremacy of a native prince. I went accordingly. The great man came on board, and we treated him with every distinction and respect. Much barbaric state was maintained as he quitted his own residence. His sword of state, with a gold scabbard, his war shield, jewel-hilted kriss, and flowing horsetails, were separately carried by the grand officers of state. Bursts of wild music announced his exit. His 14 brothers and principal Pengirans surrounded him, and a number, formidable on the deck of a vessel, covered the rear. He stayed 2 hours and a half, ate and drank, and talked with great familiarity, till the oppressive heat of the crowded cabin caused me to wish them all to another place. He departed at last, under a salute of 21 guns, and the fatigues of the day were satisfactorily brought to a close. I afterwards sent the Raja the presents I had brought for him, consisting of a silk sarong, some yards of red cloth and velvet, a pocket pistol, scissors and knives with tea, biscuits, sweetmeats, china playthings, etc., etc. A person coming here should be provided with a few articles of small importance to satisfy the crowd of inferior chiefs. Soap, small parcels of tea, lucifers, writing paper, a large stock of cigars, biscuits and knives are the best. For without being great beggars, they seem greatly to value these trifles, even in the smallest quantity. The higher class inquired frequently for scents, and for the great men I know no present which would be more acceptable than a small pier glass. All ranks seemed greatly pleased with those aboard, and some of the lower orders, quite ignorant of the reflection, laughing, moving, sitting and rising, to observe the corresponding effect.
Brooke was playing the role of a diplomat and a trade ambassador, but he wasn't the type of person to sit around in long ceremonies. He was a man of action.
2 days were wasted in ceremony. The Raja visited us, and we visited the Raja's brother, Muda Muhammad, a sulky savage. In the evening of the same day, I intimated my wish to be allowed to visit various places in the Raja's territory, particularly some Dayak tribes. I received his permission, to my surprise, to go to Samarahan and Lundu, the latter full of Dayaks, but he informed me that he would not answer for my safety going up the river, as he was at war with some rebellious subjects. I was too glad to get this permission, and tomorrow morning we start on the first of these excursions. On the evening of the same day, we were surprised by a visit from the Pengiran Mahkota, the third in rank, and the governor of the place when the Raja is absent. He came after dark and stayed till 10, and we had a most interesting discussion on the trade and future prospects of this place. He informed me, in the first place, that he had received a letter from the Sultan of Sambas, offering to assist in opening the mines and requesting permission to trade with this country. He had not yet answered the letter. He did not himself like the Dutch, but feared to take on himself the consequences of a refusal. The Raja had told him to act as he thought proper, but he wished the Raja to authorize him. Would I speak to the Raja on the subject? Certainly, I replied. I would do so with pleasure if he wished it. He then went on to say that 3 English vessels from Singapore had already been here and taken away a cargo of antimony ore. But when the country was established and its resources brought into action, could I answer for a sufficient number of English vessels coming here to take the produce? I replied that if protected from outrage, it was a matter beyond doubt, and that wherever there was a profitable trade, ships in plenty would be found. His next question was, in case the Dutch attacked them, would the English government, in consideration of the trade with the territory of Borneo proper, enter into a treaty to give them aid, in short, a defensive alliance? I replied that I had no warrant to answer such a question, but that my opinion was that they would not interfere in the concerns of a foreign power, adding that their not doing so was the best proof that the Borneans could have that in trading with them they had nothing to apprehend. That he must well know that the Dutch had never established themselves on the territory of any Malay prince without ultimately laying claim to it. I instanced Sambas and Sumatra, and that they were doing the same at Bali and Lombok. I told him they were always ready to make large advances in money for trade, for which they took a mortgage of land. They assisted in opening a country and founded claims on the assistance so given that it was easy to let them come. But I feared he would find it difficult to get rid of them ever after, and that the most fatal consequences might ensue to his country, which, he knew, was the last Malay state of any power not under Dutch influence. He granted all this, allowed their extreme jealousy of the Dutch, but in case they went to war. I replied, did he ever remember an instance when the Dutch had made war without first having a footing in a Malay state? He did not remember, and I told him so open a violation was not the danger. The danger to the Raja was their coming here on friendly terms.
James Brooke was concerned about trade on a strategic level, British versus the Dutch. 5 years earlier, James Brooke himself tried to be a trader. When the East India Company's trade monopoly to China was rescinded in 1833, James decided that he, along with so many others, would venture into private trading to China. He got a loan from his father and bought out an old slaver brig, the Finley, 290 tons. He hired the captain that he knew from the East India Company ship, the Castle Huntley, the same ship that James traveled on when he went to China in 1830. Brooke wanted to get the best of both worlds. He wanted to explore remote countries and also to make money with trade. Instead of loading the ship to the brim with opium, which would have guaranteed a profit, Brooke decided a mixed cargo was best. He and the captain fought bitterly throughout the whole voyage. Once the ship arrived in China, the trading was so bad that Brooke had to sell the ship to cover his losses. Brooke discovered that he probably wasn't meant to be a trader, and during his next trip, he would avoid being bound by trade.
Trade has not only a direct influence, but exercises indirectly the worst drawbacks against success. It places a gentleman in a false and difficult position, and arms against him the whole body of European merchants in the various ports. For it is difficult for them to conceive that a trader has not some sinister view, and as a consequence, they withhold all their local information and local assistance.
When James's father dies in 1835 and leaves him £30,000, James now has enough money to buy a ship and to finance the voyage. A voyage he had been dreaming about for a very long time.
The voyage I made to China opened an entirely new scene and showed me what I had never seen before: savage life and savage nature. I inquired and I read, and I became more and more assured that there was a large field of discovery and adventure open to any man daring enough to enter upon it. Just take a map and trace a line over the Indian archipelago with its 1,000 unknown islands and tribes. Cast your eye over the vast island of New Guinea, where the foot of European has scarcely, if ever, trod. Tell me, would not a man's life be well spent? Tell me, would it not be well sacrificed in an endeavor to explore these regions? When I think on dangers and death, I think of them only because they would remove me from such a field for ambition, for energy, and for knowledge. With a small vessel, properly equipped and provided with the necessary instruments for observation and the means for collecting specimens in natural history, it is proposed in the first instance to proceed to Singapore, which may be considered as headquarters for the necessary intervals of refreshment and repose, and for keeping open a certain communication with Europe. Here, the best local information can be obtained, interpreters procured, the crew augmented for any particular service, and here, if needful, a small vessel of native construction may be added to the expedition to facilitate the objects in view. The specimens of natural history will be forwarded home on every visit to Singapore, and the information will be sent to the Geographical Society and may always, if it be of any value, be used as freely as it is communicated. On the commencement of the healthy season, I propose sailing from Singapore and proceeding without loss of time to Maludu Bay, at the north end of Borneo. This spot has been chosen for the first essay, and in a country every part of which is highly interesting and almost unknown. The mere fact of its being a British possession gives it a prior claim to attention.
Maludu Bay, or Marudu Bay as it is known today in Sabah, Malaysia, was Brooke's original destination. The bay itself is across from the island Balambangan. The East India Company had already tried twice to turn this island into a British settlement. It was a twist of fate that led James Brooke to Sarawak. With the initial diplomacy out of the way, Brooke can now concentrate on his own endeavors, his explorations and scientific inquiries.
August the 19th, 1839. The Pengiran Makota came, after breakfast, to say that the Raja was too unwell to see us. At the same time, Makota brought me a Dayak, a real, living Dayak of Lundu, whom I kept aboard for some hours to gain as much information from him as I could. And, from the manner in which it was given, I entertained no doubt of its truth and fidelity. He spoke Malay indifferently and with a very strong accent, but sufficiently well to be understood. He had been absent from his tribe 5 months by order of the Raja Makota, and was now about to return. On being asked whether he would proceed in our boat to Lundu, he answered he would do so willingly. His complexion was somewhat darker than that of the generality of Malays, the countenance intelligent, the eye quick and wondering, the forehead of a medium height. His stature was 5 feet 2 inches. His limbs were well formed and muscular, the ankles and knees small, and his chest was expanded. He walked well and erectly, and bore every mark of his physical powers having been developed by constant exercise. He was by no means shy or reserved, but answered readily to our questions, and often, when they exceeded his power of comprehension, made us repeat them. I asked him at first whether we could go to Lundu, and whether they would be glad to see us. His tribe, he replied, both men and women, would be much pleased to have Europeans with them, so that we might rest assured of a kind reception. This native, whose title was Pangawa, gave me the following information. His tribe lived at Lundu, which was not situated on the river. The Sabuyao live on the river, and are the first we shall see. Salako is not far from Lundu, near the territory of Sambas. The Kura live in the same neighborhood, half a day's journey from the Sebuyao Iban. Amongst these tribes, they have never had war, but the Sea Dayaks of Sarabas sometimes attack them. The Sarabas tribe is strong and fond of fighting. The Bintulu tribe, good and tattooed. His tribe never tattooed themselves. They do not use the sumpitan. They eat everything, hogs, snakes, etc. They have heads in their houses. It is a custom amongst them. How do you get the heads?
Whenever we have a fight, we preserve them.
Do you go on purpose to catch people and cut off their heads?
Never.
Do your tribe practice the ceremony of mixing the blood of the stranger with that of their chief? And after drinking, are they brothers?
No, my tribe do not. But at Rajang and Bintulu, they do so.
Could I go to Rejang and Bintulu?
Yes, I will go with you if you wish.
When a Dayak chief dies, what do they do with his body?
We take it into the jungle, place it on a platform, and build a house over it with a railing around.
Who gets the property the chief leaves?
His wife and children.
In the house of the dead man, do they put anything?
Yes, the heads he had in his life, drinking vessels, and the clothes he wore.
Do they put food there?
Yes.
What food?
Hog or deer. After that, there is a feast.
Do they eat the food put with the dead chief?
No, that is left with him.
When they want a wife, how do they get one?
The man must go to the father. Then, if the father likes, he lets him have his daughter.
Does the man give the father any present?
Yes, clothes, food, and other things.
How many wives can a man marry?
1. When she dies, he gets another.
When a wife comes to her husband's house, is there any ceremony?
Yes, they give a feast.
Who gives the feast?
Both father and husband.
Have you any priests amongst you who say prayers?
No, Malays have plenty.
When a chief dies, what becomes of his spirit?
It goes into the clouds.
When the chief dies and goes into the clouds, do you ever see him again?
No, but when his friend dies too, they will meet.
Amongst these spirits, is there one great spirit above the rest?
I do not know, but there are a great many spirits of my countrymen in the clouds. Others are not there.
Do you know if there is a god?
Yes,
Do the Dayaks offer sacrifices or pray like the Islamites?
they offer sacrifice of hog and deer.
To whom do you offer sacrifice?
To Biadum,
Who is Biadum?
a great Dayak chief of former days.
Biadum, is he one person? Or are there many like him?
Biadum is one person.
Do you ever offer sacrifice to any other spirit?
Never to Biadum alone.
Did you ever see Biadum?
No, the people of former days saw him.
Who sends snow, lightning, thunder, and rain?
Biadum.
Here my visitor showed such unequivocal signs of weariness that I ordered him something to eat, and he partook of salt beef, biscuit, and grog. I closed our questions by asking him, "Are many of your tribe converted to Islam?
Yes, a good many.
Are you of Islam?"
No, I do not want to be.
The province of Sarawak was at that period in arms against the authority of the Sultan of Brunei, and the Raja Muda Hassim, at once the governor of the country and the uncle of the sovereign, was busily engaged endeavouring to suppress the rebellion. Probably it may have entered his mind that the unlooked-for advent of an English traveller might be turned to his advantage in the campaign about to commence on one of the neighbouring rivers, where the rebels had succeeded in strongly entrenching themselves. And it is also probable that with this view, every civility was shown to Mr. Brooke, and the consent of the Raja readily obtained for his visiting that portion of the country still firm in its allegiance. After remaining a week at the anchorage, the required passport was duly furnished, and Mr. Brooke, in the longboat of his yacht, escorted by a few native prahus, moved down the river and passed out into the Moratabas. After an ascent of 80 miles up the Samarahan, the Pengaran, or chief of the escort, declared that the Dayaks were everywhere hostile, and as he was responsible to the Raja for the safety of Mr. Brooke, he insisted on returning to Sarawak, which they reached again after an absence of only 4 days. During this period, besides a hasty survey, a cursory glance at the villages was all that could be obtained. After 5 days' repose on board the yacht, Mr. Brooke again set forth on the 30th of August with the same flotilla and guides, proceeding to the entrance of the Lundu River.
September 1st. The River Lundu is of considerable breadth, about half a mile at the mouth, and 150 or 200 yards off Tungong. Tungong stands on the left hand going up, close to the margin of the stream, and is enclosed by a slight stockade. Within this defence there is one enormous house for the whole population and 3 or 4 small huts. The exterior of the defence between it and the river is occupied by sheds for prahus, and at each extremity are 1 or 2 houses belonging to Malay residents. The common habitation, as rude as it is enormous, measures 594 feet in length, and the front room, or street, is the entire length of the building, and 21 feet broad. The back part is divided by mat partitions into the private apartments of the various families, and of these there are 45 separate doors, leading from the public apartment. The widowers and young unmarried men occupy the public room, as only those with wives are entitled to the advantage of separate rooms. This edifice is raised 12 feet from the ground, and the means of ascent is by the trunk of a tree with notches cut in it, a most difficult, steep, and awkward ladder. In front is a terrace 50 feet broad, running partially along the front of the building, formed like the floors of split bamboo. This platform, as well as the front room, besides the regular inhabitants, is the resort of pigs, dogs, birds, monkeys, and fowls, and presents a glorious scene of confusion and bustle. The Sabuyo Dayaks are a wild-looking, but apparently quiet and inoffensive race. The apartment of their chief, by name Sajuga, is situated nearly in the centre of the building and is larger than any other. In front of it, nice mats were spread on the occasion of our visit, whilst over our heads dangled about 30 ghastly skulls, according to the custom of these people. The chief was a man of middle age, with a mild and pleasing countenance and gentle manners. He had around him several sons and relations, and 1 or 2 of the leading men of his tribe. But the rest seemed by no means to be restrained by his presence, or to shew him any particular marks of respect, certainly not the slightest of the servile obsequiousness observed by the Malays before their prince. Their dress consists of a single strip of cloth round the loins, with the ends hanging down before and behind, and a light turban composed of the bark of trees round the head, so arranged that the front is stuck up, somewhat resembling a short plume of feathers. Some 30 skulls were hanging from the roof of the apartment, and I was informed that they had many more in their possession. All, however, the heads of enemies, chiefly of the tribe of Sarabas. On inquiring, I was told that it is indispensably necessary a young man should procure a skull before he gets married. On my urging them that the custom would be more honoured in the breach than in the observance, they replied that it was established from time immemorial and could not be dispensed with. Subsequently, however, Sir Jugar allowed that heads were very difficult to obtain now, and a young man might sometimes get married by giving presents to his ladylove's parents. At all times, they denied warmly ever obtaining any heads, but those of their enemies, adding they were bad people and deserved to die. During the course of the day, we ascended the river to visit the settlement of Chinese lately established here. It is situated about 2.5 miles up the river, on the same side as Tungong, and consists of 30 men, real Chinese, and 5 women of the mixed breed of Sambas. Nothing can be more flourishing than this infant settlement, and I could hardly credit their statement that it had only been formed between 4 and 5 months. The soil they represented as most excellent, and none are better judges. Many acres were cleared and under cultivation. Rice, siri, sweet potatoes, and Indian corn were growing abundantly, and they were able to supply us with 7 pikul, or 933 pounds, of sweet potatoes, without sensibly diminishing their crop. They showed me samples of birds' nests, beeswax, garu wood, and ebony, collected in the vicinity, chiefly from Gunung Gading. The Dayaks, they told me, collected rattans, and likewise canes, which are plentiful. The mixed breed of the Chinese with the Malay or Dayak are a good-looking and industrious race, partaking much more of the Chinese character than that of the natives of this country. This mainly arises from education and early formed habits, which are altogether Chinese, and in religion and customs they likewise follow, in a great measure, the paternal stock. The race are worthy of attention, as the future possessors of Borneo. 3,000 were said to be on their way to the Bornean territory. The head man of this settlement, a Chinese of Canton, but long resident in the vicinity of Sambas, gave me some valuable information respecting the Sarawak Mountains. He had, with a considerable party of his countrymen, been employed there at the gold mines, and he spoke of them as abundant and of the ore as good. Tin they had not found, but thought it existed. Antimony ore was to be had in any quantities, and diamonds were likewise discovered. I mention these facts as coming from an intelligent Chinese, well able from experience to judge of the precious metals and the probability of their being found.
Brooke spent 10 days with the Sibuyao Iban. During that time, he made ethnological observations, took physical measurements, and even started to compile a vocabulary. When he returned to Kuching, he renewed his direct discussions with Muda Hassim on the topic of trade.
I began by saying that I, as a private gentleman, unconnected with commerce, could have no personal interest in what I was about to speak, that the Raja must clearly understand that I was in no way connected with the government of Singapore and no way authorized to act for them, that he must therefore look upon it merely as my private opinion and act afterwards as his wisdom thought fit. I represented to him that the Kingdom of Borneo was the last Malay state possessing any power, and that this might be in a great measure attributed to the little intercourse they had had with European powers. I thought it highly advisable to call into play the resources of his country by opening a trade with individual European merchants. Sarawak, I stated, was a rich place, and the territory around produced many valuable articles for a commercial intercourse: beeswax, birds' nests, rattans, besides large quantities of antimony ore and sorgo, which might be considered the staple produce of the country. In return for these, the merchants of Singapore could send goods from Europe or China which its people required, such as gunpowder, muskets, cloths, etc., and that both parties would thus be benefited by their commercial interchange of commodities. I conceived that Singapore was well fitted for trade with this place, The Raja must not suppose I was desirous of excluding other nations from trading here, or that I wished he should trade with the English alone. On the contrary, I thought that the Americans, the French, or any other nation should be admitted on the same terms as the English. Of course, I was not allowed to proceed without much questioning and discussion. Many of the views were urged and re-urged to remove their false notions. That Mr. Bonham had the supreme command of the trade of Singapore was the prominent one, and when he died or was removed, would not the next governor alter all kind intentions and acts? What friend should they have at Singapore then? Again, they thought that a few ships might come at first, but then they would deceive them and not come again. It was very difficult to explain that if they procured cargoes at an advantageous rate, they would come here for their own advantage. If not, of course, it would not be worth their while to come at all. The entire discussion proceeded with the utmost goodwill and politeness.
Shortly after this discussion, Muda Hassim gives James Brooke an orangutan. Brooke was very interested in the orangutan question. What is the orangutan question? How many species of orangutan live in Borneo? At the time, the theory was there were two species, Myas rombi and the much larger Myas papan. Muda Hassim had given Brooke a live Myas rombi, and he named her Betsy. In addition to Betsy, Muda Hassim also gave Brooke the hand of a Myas papan. It was suggested to Brooke that the best place to look for orangutans was at the Sadong River. The Sadong River at this time was its own territory, separate from Sarawak. The capital of the river Sadong was Insinge, but in Brooke's journal, he calls it Songi.
The town called Songi is of considerable size, and the entire population along the river may certainly be reckoned at from 2,000 to 3,000 persons, independent of Dayaks. The country has a flourishing aspect, but the soil is represented as bad, being soft and muddy. There is a good deal of trade from this river, and it annually sends several large prahus to Singapore. 2 were lying off the town when we arrived, and 2 others had sailed for that place 20 days before. There is nothing peculiar about the Malay population, except that it struck me, generally speaking, that they appeared better off than the people of Sarawak, or others I've visited hereabouts. We ascended the river by night, anchored a short distance from the Songi, in a tideway like a sluice, and entered the smaller river shortly after daylight. Having sent the Penggirans ahead to advise Sharif Sahib of our arrival, we pulled slowly up to the kampong of the Datu Jembrong, where we brought up to breakfast. Datu Jembrong is a native of Mindanao, an Ilanun and a pirate. He is slightly advanced in years, but stout and resolute looking, and of a most polite demeanour, as oily-tongued a cutthroat as a gentleman would wish to associate with. He spoke of his former life without hesitation, and confessed himself rather apprehensive of going to Singapore. He was remarkably civil, and sent us a breakfast of some fruit, saltfish, stale turtle's eggs, and coffee sweetened with syrup. But spite of all this, his bloodthirsty education and habits prejudiced me against him. Breakfast finished, we went forward to visit Sharif Sahib, who received us in an open hall, promised to get us as many animals as he could now, regretted our short stay, and assured me he would collect more by the time I returned. Amongst these is to be an orangutan of the Myas papan type, living or dead. I at the same time offered $10 for the skeleton belonging to the hand already in my possession, and a less sum for the parts. Being the first European Sharif Sahib had ever met, he was rather puzzled to know what we were like. But we had every reason to be satisfied with his kindness and the civility of his people. The inhabitants, though crowding to see us, are by no means intrusive, and their curiosity is too natural to be harshly repressed. His name and descent are Arabic. His father, an Arab, having married a daughter of the Borneo Raja. The Malays evidently honour this descent and consider his birth very high. His power, they say, equals his family, as he is, in some measure, independent. And were he to instigate the Sadong country to take arms against Borneo, it is very probable he would overthrow the government and make himself Sultan of Borneo. In person, this noble partakes much of his father's race, both in height and features, being tall and large, with a fine nose and contour of face. His manners are reserved, but kind, and he looks as if too indolent to care much about acquiring power, too fat for an active traitor, though a dangerous man to oppress. We exchanged presents, mine consisting of some nankeen, red cloth, knife, scissors, and handkerchief, whilst he gave me the shield of a great Kayan warrior, a Bukhar spear, a goat, fowls, and our dinner and breakfast daily. He promised me the arms of all the Dayak tribes and plenty of animals, particularly my much-desired Myas papan, and I, in return, agreed to bring him 2 small tables, 6 chairs, and a gun.
From Insinge, Brooke goes to Simunjan, but he's only there for a day before he goes back to Insinge and then back to his ship, the Royalist.
The first part of the night was dark, and the Panglima in his prahu with 12 men lay close to the shore and under the dark shadow of the hill. About 9, the attention of the watch on deck was attracted by some bustle ashore, and it soon swelled to the wildest cries. The only word we could distinguish, however, being "Dayak! Dayak!" All hands were instantly on deck. I gave the order to charge and fire a gun with a blank cartridge, and in the meantime lit a blue light. The gig was lowered, a few muskets and cutlasses thrown into her, and I started in the hope of rescuing our poor Malay friends. The vessel in the meantime was prepared for defence, guns loaded, boarding nettings ready for running up, and the people at quarters, for we were ignorant of the number, the strength, or even the description of the assailants. I met the Panglima's boat pulling towards the vessel and returned with her, considering it useless and rash to pursue the foe. The story is soon told. A fire had been lit on the shore, and after the people had eaten, they anchored their boat and, according to their custom, went to sleep. The fire had probably attracted the roving Saribas Dayaks, who stole upon them, took them by surprise, and would inevitably have cut them off but for our presence. They attacked the prahu fiercely with their spears. 5 out of 12 jumped into the water and swam ashore, and the Panglima Raja was wounded severely. When our blue light was lit, they desisted, and directly the gun fired, they paddled away fast. We never saw them. The poor Panglima walked aboard with a spear fixed in his breast, the barb being buried, and a second rusty spear wound close to the first. The head of the weapon was cut out, his wounds dressed, and he was put to bed. Another man had a wound from a wooden-headed spear, and most had been struck more or less by these rude and luckily innocuous weapons. A dozen or two of Dayak spears were left in the Malay boat, which I got. Some were well-shaped, with iron heads, but the mass simply pieces of hard wood, sharp-pointed, which they hurl in great numbers. Firearms the Dayaks had none, and whilst attacking made no noise whatever, whilst the Malays, on the contrary, shouted lustily, some perhaps from bravery, most from terror. The force that attacked them was differently stated. Some said the boat contained 80 or 100 men, others rated the number as low as 50. And allowing for exaggeration, perhaps there might have been 35, not fewer, from the number of spears thrown. Being fully prepared, we set our watch and retired as usual to our beds, and the stealthy and daring attack, right under the guns of the schooner, having given me a lesson to keep the guns charged in future. The plan was well devised, for we could not fire without the chance of hitting our friends as well as foes, and the deep shadow of the hill entirely prevented our seeing the assailants. We had a hard pull against the tide and arrived at Sarawak about 4 p.m. We had eaten nothing since breakfast at 8, and we had to sit and talk and drink tea and smoke till 8 in the evening. Then dinner was announced and we retired to the private apartments. My poor men came willingly too. The table was laid English style, a good curry and rice, grilled fowls, and a bottle of wine. We did justice to our cheer, and the Raja, throwing away all reserve, bustled about with the proud and pleasing consciousness of having given us an English dinner in proper style, now drawing the wine, changing our plates, pressing us to eat, saying, "You are at home." Dinner over, we sat and drank and smoked and talked cheerfully, till, tired and weary, we expressed a wish to retire, and were shown to a private room. A crimson silk mattress embroidered with gold was my couch. It was covered with white gold-embroidered mats and pillows. Our men fared equally well and enjoyed their wine, a luxury to us. Our stock of wine and spirits having been expended in this some time, I parted from the Raja with regret. Never was such a blazing as when we left Sarawak. 21 guns I fired to the Raja, and he fired 42 to me. At least we counted 24, and they went on firing afterwards, as long as ever we were in sight. The last words the Raja Muda Hassim said as I took my leave were, "Tuan Brooke, do not forget me." Amongst the curiosities in my possession are spears, swords, and shields from various tribes, a coat of mail made to the northward of Borneo and worn by the pirates, specimens of Sakaran and Saribas cloth, ornaments and implements of the Cebu, and last but not least, a gold-handled kris presented me by the Raja, which formerly belonged to his father and which he constantly wore himself. I likewise presented him with a small English dagger with a mother-of-pearl handle, and my favour was so high with him that he used always to wear my gift, and I, to return the compliment, wore his.
When Brooke reached Singapore, he dutifully sent his charts, reports, and specimens he had collected in Sarawak back to England. He authored some newspaper articles, and at the end of November, he leaves Singapore once more. This time, he goes to Dutch-controlled Sulawesi.
The history of my late cruise to Borneo has agitated the society here, and whilst the merchants have presented me with an address of thanks, the government, or rather the governor, has been cooler to me than before. He, George Bonham, would fain have me lay aside all politics. But whilst I see such treachery and baseness on one part, and such weakness, imbecility and indifference on the other, I will continue to upraise my voice at fitting seasons. I will not leave my native friends to be deceived and betrayed by either white nation, and, what the governor does not like, I will speak bold truths to native ears, convinced that it is the best means of preserving the independence of the Malay states, as it is the only line an English gentleman could take, who seeks their friendship, and enters their country with no other object than their good and his own improvement. Don't think, however, that I would intrude or force opinion or advice. Until asked, I am silent. If I was governor of the Straits with power to restrict the Dutch, I would spread the British name and commerce through many channels now shut or unknown.
Brooke didn't make any headway in his political efforts in Sulawesi and returned to Singapore in May of 1840. Back when Brooke was still in Sarawak, the First Opium War had broken out in China. He briefly considered joining in the fight, but decided against it. He was starting to get favorable responses to his newspaper articles about Borneo.
The China expedition from Bengal has left this some days under the command of Sir Gordon Bremer. I will not join them, being better employed, unless requested to do so, and having some object in view, honourable or useful. Lord Auckland, I hear from Calcutta, intends to write me, and my English letters say ministers at home will probably communicate with me too. As soon as Royalist is coppered, I return to Borneo and continue my inquiries there, which seem to have interested others besides myself.
One of these interested parties was in fact George Robert Waterhouse, a prominent naturalist and entomologist and a close friend of Charles Darwin. When Brooke's letters and reports on the orangutans reached London, Waterhouse was interested in learning more, so he wrote to James to ask him some follow-up questions. Some biographers of James Brooke have suggested that he was asked to return to Sarawak for a second time to help suppress the rebellion. But in reality, James Brooke had only planned on making a quick stop at Sarawak. He had charted the coastline from Tanjung Datu to a point near the Subuyao River. His plan for this trip was to finish the charts for the entire northwest coast. Brooke planned on stopping in at Bintulu to see the tattooed Dayaks, then on to Brunei. His ultimate destination was going to be Manila, which he hoped to reach before the monsoon winds changed. In fact, he was so sure of his plan that he had already directed that any new mail that arrived at Singapore should be forwarded to Manila.
I begin this time at Tanjong Api, run over last year's work, revisit Sarawak, see the Kayans, and then proceed close in with the coast to Borneo proper. My fame is up amongst the Malay Rajas, and I ought now to be beginning. I shall get the May letter from you, but the rest will be received at Manila.
Brooke arrives for the second time in Sarawak in late August 1840.
The Raja Muda Hassim gave me a cordial reception, and the chiefs and people appeared united in their expressions of joy at seeing me again. But no progress had been made in the suppression of the rebellion. On the contrary, it raged with greater violence, and armed tribes of Dayaks were assembled on several points within 30 miles of the town. Muda Hassim promises fair and steady, and as soon as a blow is struck at the rebels, he will himself accompany me to Borneo, touching by the way at all the principal rivers. In the hope he may do so, I am induced to wait and employ myself during the interim with 1 or 2 excursions.
While waiting for Muda Hassim to crush the rebellion, Brooke chose to return to the Sadong to hunt orangutans and to explore the Semunjan River.
Started on an expedition up the Sadong River. I had fitted up my own longboat, the Skimmerlong, with some additional comforts, having an excellent awning under the mats, which kept us dry in the violent rains of the season. Our party consisted of Mr. Williamson, Mr. Williams, Mr. Mackenzie, the mate of the boat, and 3 seamen. 2 Pengirans in a large native boat accompanied us as an escort. On the second evening, we disembarked at Songi and took up our lodging at the house of the chief, and proceeded the next day to the headquarters of Sharif Sahib, one of the most renowned of the river chiefs. I presented him with a double-barreled gun, which gratified him much. And on my expressing a desire to ascend the river in order to see and shoot the orangutan in its native woods, he freely gave me permission. In spite of the remonstrances and entreaties of the collective Pangirans, we proceeded up the river. They said, and they swore, that we could not ascend at all, that the stream was very strong, and if we got up, the least it would take was 5 days. The river covered with trees and drifts of timber rendered it dangerous. There was imminent peril, and if anything happened to me, what would become of them? Their lives would be the forfeit.
The expedition was successful. They made it all the way up to the seasonal lake, Lake Prupalk, a lake that forms during the wet season near the headwaters of the Simunjan River. This is where Brooke first meets the Balau Iban.
At this season, the high ground is alone above water, but during the northeast monsoon, the lake is represented as dry, with only a deep channel running through it. The immediate banks on the left are low but verdant, and the hills are likewise adorned with finer timber than the swampy plain. Whilst lazily waiting the report of our Dayaks, who were detached in search of the Mayas, we fell in with a party of Balaus, who were building a prahu up a short creek. The Pangirans instantly swore they were the most treacherous and perfidious of the Dayak tribes, and assured me I should be murdered or maimed if I ventured near them. But having sent to apprise them of my coming to prevent any sudden alarm, I pushed into the creek, where I found about 20 men at work. The chief spoke Malay badly, for they are an independent tribe, consisting of 500 or 600 warriors, and located about half a day's journey from the lake to the southward. They dislike the Malays, and hold little or no intercourse with them, and few of these people dare venture amongst them. In appearance, customs, and speech, they are the same as the Sabuyaos, and their language, therefore, as may be seen by a reference to the dialect of the latter, is nearer the Malay than is that of other tribes. They are friendly with the Sabuyaos, but at deadly feud with the Saribas, and they seemed proud when they told me that the prahu they were making was meant for a cruise against these enemies. To me, they were very civil, invited me to their country, and, on my declining, promised to visit me tomorrow. After our interview with the Balau, other Mayas were discovered, and off we set again and killed an adult female Rombi with a young one at her breast, which we took alive, and a second a year or two old, probably her former offspring, in company, which we likewise killed. Heavy rain setting in and our guns being thoroughly soaked, we returned from an agreeable day's excursion, having added much to natural history on this interesting point and something to geography.
With such a successful hunt, Brooke returns to Kuching to say goodbye and to continue his journey towards Bintulu, Brunei, and Manila.
October 2nd. Lying at Sarawak, losing valuable time, but pending the war, difficult to get away. For whenever the subject is mentioned, Muda Hassim begs me not to desert him just as it is coming to a close, and daily holds out prospects of the arrival of various Dayak tribes. The Raja urged upon me that he was deceived and betrayed by the intrigues of Pangirans, who aimed at alienating his country, and that if I left him, he should probably have to remain here for the rest of his life, being resolved to die rather than yield to the unjust influence which others were seeking to acquire over him. And he appealed to me that after our friendly communication, I could not, as an English gentleman, desert him under such circumstances. I felt that honourably I could not do so, and though reluctantly enough, I resolved to give him the aid he asked. Small indeed, but of consequence in such a petty warfare.
And this fateful decision to give aid to the Bruneian forces, made on the 2nd of October 1840, brings us to the end of Episode 2, The Arrival of James Brooke. This podcast is supported by Goethe Institute Malaysia, within the framework of Borneo Perantis.